I had like a whole sunburn.
Start this going again. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third of three our spring accessibility series from the Idaho Digital Accessibility Consortium. Today we have Jeremy Seda and Carolyn Quintero, Jeremy from NIC and Carolyn from BSU, to talk about accessibility for organizations from their perspectives, working in higher ed and the things that they've done to increase accessibility across their campuses. So thank you both for joining us. Very much looking forward to it. I figure we'll just go ahead and dive right in and turn it over to you two.
Thank you. And I want to just start by saying happy Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So the title slide here, we have barriers and challenges to accessibility buy-in in higher education. And I have a interesting picture of a stop sign with 4 signs immediately below it that are signifying no left turn, right turn. You can't go back and you can't go forward. And it'll kind of make sense within the context of the presentation a little later on. Let me go ahead and advance to the next slide.
All right, so hi everyone. My name is Carolyn Quintero and I am a web accessibility analyst at Boise State University. I've been in this role since 2017 and I've been at Boise State since 2011. Before that, I was at Lewis Clark State College. So my entire professional career has been in higher education. And on this slide, you'll see a picture of me with my family, my wonderful husband, Tony, and my 2 little boys, 7-year-old Oscar and 3-year-old Theo.
Nice. And my name is Jeremy Seda. I'm the IT Accessibility Coordinator for North Idaho College. I've worked in various roles, usually with web development, and always having to focus on the accessibility aspect of the web development I was doing, and went over full-time IT accessibility about almost 6 years ago. First started at Big Bend Community College. Now I'm at North Idaho College, and this background picture is my recent trip to Lebanon, and this is actually on the Phoenician Wall in Batroun, Lebanon. I couldn't help myself. I had to get up on top of the wall and take a picture just because it seemed like too good of an opportunity not to do. So moving on. Carolyn, you want to take this slide?
Yeah, so just to give an intro kind of overview of what we're going to talk about in the next hour, we want to talk about kind of how the problem, quote unquote, started, because it's been there, but talk about specifically in the context of the past 2 years, kind of what big problems have started. Talk a little bit about statistics. So what we saw in our position over the last 2 years and how that affected mental health on campus. So both for good and bad. And then towards the end, we'll talk about kind of steps that you can take to get started in your own organization. So things that have really helped us kind of start the conversation, keep things going. And then we'll also talk about some stuff that we still have, see as work that still needs to be done. So kind of tips to keep on going once you get started.
Excellent. So I'll go and start here with how the problems started. So really the cracks in the dam, so to speak, were already there. Just then COVID just broke everything wide open. I would say that fear is probably what I would consider the strongest emotion, because it just seems like everybody kind of lost their mind and didn't really know what to prioritize, just that things needed to get online quickly, and that became just the main priority. So kind of want to ask a rhetorical question and just say, what does everybody kind of think the masses found more scary? Just this fear of the unknown or fear of not complying with the ADA? It's probably the former over the latter, because, the ADA has been around for more than 30 years. And it wasn't real scary to folks, before COVID hit. And I didn't think it got much weight, once we were in the midst of COVID. So, everybody was we're all sharing the same experience, in that we're kind of drowning in its survival mode. And I actually liken this to my analogy of my hobby of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, is that when I'm practicing Jiu-Jitsu and grappling, it's like I'm trying to keep continually create pressure and put somebody in a bad spot, or try to work so that they're in a worse spot, because when somebody's under pressure, they tend to make bad decisions. And a lot of that comes from the urgency of that pressure. And then they're just doing anything they can to get out of it. And that usually means they put themselves in a worse spot. And I kind of feel like that's where a lot of institutions were going. And if unchecked, I couldn't imagine being 2 years behind if nothing had been done, where we would be at if we weren't trying to proactively and reactively address the situations with accessibility in a very aggressive online environment with too much content being pushed online. Let's see here. And Carolyn, did you want to handle that last bullet point?
Yeah, so with all that, kind of one thing I forgot to say on the previous slide, the image we had on the previous slide was everyone just kind of in their own canoe going down this really nice calm river. And now we're in this drowning moment where the dam is broken. It's really difficult to keep up with, let alone ahead of those demands. So like Jeremy said, if we hadn't started this process already, we would probably be even in a worse boat. But remember how we all felt when overnight we lost access to pretty much everything. It was unknown. We weren't sure what was going on. And you're just trying to figure out how to switch your processes. And then, you know, you don't want to listen to the person tapping you on the shoulder saying, but you need to do this and you need to do this and you need to do this. That's that survival mode. So we had that kind of challenge with our own roles as accessibility professionals, but we were also dealing with that drowning feeling as well. My kids were home. I was trying to work from home. I like grabbed everything out of my office as fast as I could. I got home without computer cords. So, you know, how do we keep up with that work when we're all in this crisis mode? So that's where we kind of start. That is that quote unquote, that's where the problem started. It was already there, but now it was just really hard to do that work because we were all just kind of going into the unknown and just trying to keep our heads above water.
Nice. So next slide, called lighthouse moment. So I have a picture of a lighthouse just getting bombarded by this enormous wave. And it's just kind of indicative of a couple things of like, one, lighthouse is kind of used to warn everybody of impending danger, whether it's a rocks or a reef or whatever, but then also there's a lookout component to it. And yeah, we were definitely, anybody in accessibility, we definitely have this lighthouse moment. And people have varying stories, but Carol and I kept going back and forth talking about just the statistics that we were seeing that was like, oh dear, we're in for a really bad time here if we don't do something about this. And I can speak to like my experience of walking into my supervisor's office, and he said, yeah, we got to upgrade our Zoom license, because everybody going home and they're going to, one, everybody's going to be using Zoom, and then two, everybody's going to be recording everything. And so I quickly started monitoring how many of the Zoom recordings were actually being ported over to our video content management system, TechSmith Nomia. And I just saw the figures just growing at an astronomical rate. And just to give you a real easy way to understand how bad the situation was for us, in 8 months, we basically doubled all the video content that we had for the campus. So in 8 months, we doubled all the video that's ever been in existence for North Idaho College. And I imagine people have kind of like similar statistics, but Carolyn said, well, not just video. And from her aspect, it seemed like just there was other elements growing at quite a large pace too.
Yeah, our documents, the number of documents we had uploaded went up by the time August hit. So from March to August, I spent all summer trying to kind of deal with this backload of inaccessible documents. By the time August hit and they were getting ready for that next fall semester, we increased our number of documents uploaded to our WordPress site by 25%. So we went from around 3,000 plus documents, that was a fairly significant number, to almost 4,000 just within a very short amount of time frame. And if you've done any work with documents, trying to make them accessible and trying to get ahead of how to, start that process from the very beginning, making that accessible, it's incredibly time consuming and difficult to keep up with. So it just got to the point where we just couldn't even keep up with it.
Hey, Carolyn, if I could ask you real
go
quick, what do you think percentage wise of those new documents were PDFs versus like Word documents?
That was all PDFs.
Oh, okay.
That was 100% PDFs. And the other thing that we saw an increase in is people uploading a variety of documents to like Google Drive and then linking to that. So we didn't even have the ability to scan and be proactive in reaching out to those people saying, hey, this has some flagged as some issues because our technology just doesn't do that. So we even had even more documents out there that we really couldn't tell if they were accessible or not. So from a web perspective, the amount of information going out just grew at a crazy rate because everything that might have been printed and put outside the door of an office now went online. Any flyer that would have been hung up around campus to advertise an event or an activity now was online. And so people were still using those print processes and then just putting their document online. So trying to have those conversations about, okay, we need a different process to get this information online. That became very challenging. And I'm still having those conversations with my colleagues today on how do we kind of move past this print mindset so that we have this flexible approach for online events, for in-person events that are accessible in digital formats, and that also work for now that we're having more in-person events. So it's definitely taken a long time to get to this point, but yeah, the total amount of content just was staggering to keep up with.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess if you don't mind, you had a lot more to say on this, Carolyn, but just talking about the overall mental health on campuses.
Yeah, so we had that going on, just the sheer amount of content, everyone trying to get everything out that they needed to do. But then we also had this issue of mental health on campus. So the bad thing was we were all struggling, whether we were a student, whether we were an employee, whether we were a parent, whether we were, whatever we were struggling, and that was bad. But the good thing about that was we were all struggling. Everyone was struggling. The spotlight on the need for accessibility, I don't think has ever been stronger than during COVID, because we all have this shared experience of what it's like to struggle with access to different degrees. But I think it gave us all an opportunity to raise our hand and say, I need a break. I need a pause. I need some help. And I did teach. So in addition to being a web accessibility analyst, I also am an adjunct instructor for the English department. And I was teaching that spring semester when we all switched to online. It was an online class already, so my students didn't really have any changes. But from March to May, my students struggled. They were struggling with trying to switch their in-person classes to online. They were struggling with getting sick. They were struggling with having to care for kids and family members. And it was really hard. So even though my class was online and I didn't really change a whole lot in mine, I could see that struggle. So my position became, we'll get through it. And so I had to make sure I built even more flexibility into my class so those students got through the semester, and I got them all through. They were all successful, but it was a real challenge. Going into the fall semester, I also taught that next semester, or I didn't teach that first fall semester, but I taught the next spring. And it was still there. The struggles of trying to learn in an online environment when maybe they weren't accustomed to that, having family members that were sick, they were getting sick. Just the stress of all of it was really weighing on them. But I also noticed students for the first time were raising their hand and saying, I need some help. I've got this going on. How can I get an extension on my assignment? How can I maybe make some changes to work with you on this? And before, I was just begging students to talk to me. like, I am here to support you. How can I help you? But after going through this experience, I think people were a little bit more aware and able to self-advocate for when they needed those mental health breaks. So I think it's a good thing and a bad thing. And I think we're going to see more of that topic in higher ed moving forward. And I would really like to see the focus on mental health also linked to accessibility, because I make sure my class is as accessible as it can be. And I have yet to lose a student. So I've gotten them all through. They've all passed the class. They've all said they really appreciate the support that I've put in place. And that's because I put a focus on their mental health and accessibility to make sure that I'm meeting their needs.
Yeah, and the interesting thing that I started seeing just in hearing from our disability support services department was that students that normally would never walk into DSS started coming in talking about anxiety and stress and all these things, just the issues they're having because they couldn't interact with their fellow students or couldn't interact with the teacher and get the information that they needed in an adequate manner. So it was causing a lot of stress and anxiety. And so, you know, what I was kind of thankful that we went, when we all finally went back to a hybrid approach, because I know there was some students who just had such a difficult time with going to I'll learn, you know, just learning 100% of the time online. And you know, one of the quotes I kind of think of in relation to this is I think from Navy SEAL saying, you know, you don't rise to the occasion, you fail to the level of your training. And I felt like there was a lot of things that everybody could have done better, but then there was some obvious situations that just were horrible solutions, in my opinion. I remember getting a call from one of my kids' school counselors saying, if, you know, we're just going to simply go to this pass fail system with the kids. And so really all they got to do is show that, you know, show up on the Zoom meeting or you know, just even send in an email and they're going to get a passing grade. You get where I'm going with this, right? And that would just anger me, because I'd say, no, your job is to teach and to do the best job that you know, that as an educator, do the best job you can to get that material, not just simply give somebody an easy pathway to get through this. And I felt like in those situations, people felt like they were doing the best job that they could, but they're really just kind of kicking the can down the road and making it difficult for not only for the student later on, but also setting up that next instructor, teacher, faculty member, setting them up for failure when that student does not have the knowledge that they should have had, you know, progressing through a grade or through a class and on to the next challenge.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing I do think Boise State did really well, as much as we could have, we tried to get those systems in place early. So the week before the state shut down, we did a stress test where everyone had to be remote learning for one day. They couldn't cancel the class. They couldn't just postpone it. They couldn't do anything. Everyone had to be online for that day to test our systems. And it just happened that the week after, the governor said, we're shutting the state down. Everyone needs to be at home if they possibly can. And so we tried as best as we could to get those systems in place, because we kind of saw the writing on the wall. So tried to be as proactive as we could. Did we miss some things? Absolutely, because we couldn't have expected the scale of what happened, but did try as best as we could to be proactive, to get the faculty the help they needed. Then they also spent tons of time over the summer getting everyone up to speed, reaching out to the K through 12 educators to say, here's how we can do some online learning and things like that. So, you know, there were definitely opportunities for improvement, but we were doing the best we had, the best we could with the time and resources we had. And that's all the more we could ask for during that time period. Moving forward, I really hope we learn those, take those lessons and continue to build on them so that we can kind of future-proof ourselves a little bit. And that leads us to our next slide.
So steps to get us started, and we have this picture of a life ring on an ocean going vessel here, and so now that we've painted a good negative picture that all of us want to forget, we can move on to some good positive stuff and propose some good solutions. So a big thing with this for me was just maintaining this positive mindset. I always believe that positives trump negatives. I am try as much as possible to work with people around accessibility and tell them like, okay, but if you do this, we're gonna not only reach these people with have disabilities who need this accessibility features in place, you're gonna make your content more understandable for everybody, as opposed to, well, if you don't do this, you're in violation of the ADA Section 508, and on down the line saying we could get a Office of Civil Rights file, or complaint filed against us, all this. People I find they don't necessarily respond so well to that. So let me give you a quick analogy. When I first started at NIC, I was kind of just really trying to understand the legal and the guidelines portion of my job. And, on one hand, there's a lot of carrots that people aren't responding to. So what do we tend to think is the alternative? We think that there's, well, I guess I'll use the stick then to motivate people. And as I was sharing a lot of my findings with my CIO, Ken Wardinsky, he said, well, I don't necessarily believe that we should go with the stick approach, but think of it like a Nerf hammer. Like you're not going to really hurt anybody with a Nerf hammer, but sure is annoying if you're just sitting there, pelting them over and over with the Nerf hammer. I'm like, okay, that's great. I like the Nerf hammer approach for those who don't respond to the positive carrot approach. Now the other side of kind of like the positive mindset is I actually like to give the example of a 1950s rat experiment with Kurt Richter. Is anybody familiar with that? Just react by raising your hand in Zoom. Okay, good. This gets me excited because it's one of my favorite things I like to tell my students or share with people in presentations or just when talking about accessibility. So this gentleman by the name of Kurt Richter was trying to do this experiment and to understand just kind of understand behavior of rats better. So he had these 12 domesticated rats and put them in this whirlpool of water. And there's 3 of the rats that basically swam to the bottom to find a way out, drowned and died. And the other 9, the domesticated rats they just swim on the surface. And he said, okay, that's interesting. Great. So he takes those rats out. He then takes rats that were basically wild rats, conducts the same experiment, and realizes something interesting. When they'd either swim to the bottom or they would just give up after a few seconds and they would all die. And it was really interesting to him because he's like, well, these rats are much more hardy. They're stronger. They're probably faster than these domesticated rats. They're used to the suffering of the wild. They shouldn't be just, every one of them shouldn't just be dying. I should see something on par with the domestic rats or better, doing better. And it was very interesting. And to him that like all of the wild rats died in that experiment. So then he changed the experiment a little bit. And the second that wild rat, or any of the rats for that matter, would more or less give up or swim to the bottom where they would ultimately meet their demise, he would quickly pull them out of that whirlpool of water, dry them off, give them a little bit of time to rest, and then he would put them back in there. And here's the interesting thing is that where these, the wild rats, domestic rats, the ones that did die, it didn't take them long, whether it was 30 seconds or a couple minutes. After he went through this process of taking them out, saving them dry, and putting them back in there, he found that they would swim for sometimes up to days. And the interesting thing is about all this is like, well, what variable changed in there? Why did it matter that he took them out, dried them off, let them rest, and then put them back in there? Why would that change the outcome of that experiment? And it's kind of a rhetorical question, but it's, I think we all kind of dawn on the same conclusion that the rats started to have hope. they knew it wasn't hopeless, that there was an out, that they could potentially survive if they just kept swimming long enough. Those hands were going to come in there, save them, dry them off, let them rest, whatever. Okay, and so human beings are a lot more complex than rats, and I think just a little bit of hope goes a long way. So again, that's why I'm always trying to give people the positive mindset, give them a little bit, lead them down the path of accessibility, rather than kind of give them doom and gloom and try to give them the stick approach. So, and Carolyn, would you mind taking us into talking about policy?
Yeah, so if that positive piece doesn't act or doesn't help, having a clear policy to lean back on is essential. So I really like this idea of the life raft, because for me, as the accessibility person at the university, that policy is my life draft to send out to people to say, this is why we need to do this. And I always lead in with, this content has been flagged in violation of policy, Here's how we're going to fix it. Here's how you're here. Here's how I'm here to support you. Here's how we can move forward. So I get that. It's like ripping the Band-Aid off. I tell them, this is the policy. Here's what we need to do. But then I really lean on the support. So I really lean on that positive aspect, because a lot of the times people are just like, oh my gosh, what do I have to do now? But again, that policy is there, and it provides me with solid evidence of, this is why it needs to change. And so that makes it easier for me to do my job. And then it makes it easier for me to get in with the people that I'm working with, so that we can have those conversations, so that I can find out, well, hey, you guys do this every single semester. Let's take some time to figure out how we can make an accessible template, so that next semester you don't have to get hit on the head with the Nerf hammer from me. You'll just have it done. So that policy is really, really important. If you don't have anything at your institution that specifically says content that you make has to be accessible, really start there. It has been a game changer for us, because we have that institutional authority to make changes when we see them, and to reach out to people to make suggestions for, hey, we got to just make these few tweaks and then we're good to go with this process. And so it just gives us a common language to work with as an institution, in addition to those federal legislation and guidelines. And that
Excellent.
Really helps us move into number 3, where increase awareness. So once you have that policy.
Mind if I jump in there for one more point? Oh, you're fine. So, once we had a policy in place here at NIC, and I know every institution is going to be different. Well, I'll just say NIC, even though we had a policy in place, procedure, everything's going, is passed by our board. It didn't really change anything for us, but we at least had something in place that we could go back to. And one of the things I wanted to, I worked with our HR department, is to kind of put a requirement in place, both in the, when people's contract renewals came up, or, in employment agreements, of basically a bullet point says, I will follow all of NIC's policy and procedures documents to the best of my knowledge. So right there, when they sign that document, it just, they've already agreed to follow these the policy and procedure documents. And when I go talk to somebody and say, hey, this is policy, well, I didn't know about it. Well, you know about it now. Well, we get all these excuses of, oh, this is my proprietary information. It's like, look, you signed a contract, right, that said you were going to be employed by NIC. One of the bullet points is you'd follow all policies and procedures. One of those is an accessibility policy. So I'm informing you now, you need to follow this, and I'm here to help so that you can follow this, so that we don't have issues down the road with Office of Civil Rights or even litigation. So thanks, Carolyn.
Yeah, no, that's a huge piece. And again, that leads into that increase of awareness of, once you have that policy, people need to know about it. So whether it's through the HR employment contract, that right when they're in the door, orientations, for new faculty, new students, new staff? How are you getting this information out there? We do training series. So I have Intro to Web Accessibility, how to create accessible documents. I do these presentations with IDAC to, again, increase awareness about the policy and about the topic. So having those different avenues really just elevates the issue. So you're kind of just poking on people every now and then, tapping them on the shoulder like, oh, hey, did you think about this? Did you know it's policy? Did you know we could make it accessible if you just did this? So that increased awareness. And eventually, and one thing I've noticed over the last 2 years is, because I've reached out and said, hey, this is university policy. Hey, this isn't accessible. Hey, this is going on. People are coming to me first now, which is a huge change. Hey, I've got this document that needs to go online. Can you help me make it accessible? Yeah, let's talk about that process and what needs to happen and when do you need it and how can we do this? We had a whole host of director positions and leadership positions that needed to be filled. As part of that process, I got in touch with all the search committees and they sent me all the CVs and all the resumes so that I could make them remediate them and make them accessible before they went out to our community. So that was a huge game changer because I was able to spend a little bit of time, make those documents accessible so they could then be shared with our community and our colleagues at Boise State so they could be informed and participate in a really important process for our university. So in past years, that might have been, well, the search is already done and now we've got this information out there. How do we make it accessible? At that point, we've kind of missed the opportunity. So that was a really huge win for me that we were able to send that information out right then and there and make it accessible. And that's because we've had this policy, this awareness campaign, this kind of constant nagging. Eventually it does pay off. And it's those small wins that you're really looking for. And did you have anything about that point, Jeremy, before we move on?
Let's see, that was their increased awareness. I don't know if I'm jumping too far ahead, but when I think of increasing awareness, I'm, just trying to talk about accessibility, digital accessibility every moment that I can, whether it's just individuals on campus or these occasional meetings that are coming up, whether it's all staff or all faculty. I try to jump in there and just give a little tidbit of knowledge about accessibility. Even something I picked up from our e-learning department is in our sometimes more than weekly email newsletters that go out. Just creating a simple graphic saying, here's a quick tip on how to make your Word documents more accessible, and then giving them one tip that's easy for them to try, whether that's alt text or using headings, and then also pointing them to a more in-depth resource if they find that tip useful. So that's, I just feel like increasing awareness is just a constant thing that I'm trying to do in little ways to hopefully make a big impact over time. So moving on to point 4 and talking about the needs risk assessment. Well, actually, I'll handle the latter part of that, the risk assessment, because this is something that that speaks volumes to some of the individuals at North Idaho College. So I took a risk assessment that was from Oregon State University, and it was in an Excel spreadsheet. And I don't really like risk assessments from the standpoint that there's usually 2 variables, risk and likelihood. Well, those are both a little bit subjective. It's my opinion that, this is the most risky behavior and this is the likelihood that it's going to happen. Well, that's nice, but at the end of the day, people kind of like things that are a little bit more concrete if we're going to actually take these assessments seriously. So I kind of, equated something with actual numbers, put more variables into this risk assessment so that the risk and the impact variables would have a little bit more of a quantitative rather than a qualitative approach to defining the variables that went into the risk assessment. But ultimately what this this did is once you have your individual items that you're defining as risky and the likelihood that they're going to happen, it plots those on a heat map. And I didn't think about this at the time until I started seeing a lot of our leadership walking around with this heat map. It basically, everybody could understand where our priorities were going to be as far as our accessibility efforts on campus, because you could see, oh, well, web accessibility, that's in the red. Yeah, what can we do to get that more in the yellow or in the green instead? And then somebody might come up with a question of saying, well, why aren't we focusing more on this aspect of accessibility? Well, that clearly falls in this item that's kind of in the yellow, and that's not as important as the red. It's not that it's not a priority, it's just that we're trying to get things out of the red and into gradually moving everything toward the green as much as possible. Everybody understood what that graphic was, and that's where the risk assessment really helped move things forward.
Yeah, and that's great, because that's a big challenge, especially in higher education. How do we quantify and identify where we need to work on it? And that comes up a lot at Boise State. Well, how do we know exactly what we need to do so we can put our effort towards it? And one of the things, as far as the point on the needs assessment that I'm working on to help increase awareness, to help meet the people I work with where they need, we are doing a needs assessment for training. So we've are sending it out this next week, and it was actually the needs assessment that we developed in a association with the Idaho Digital Accessibility Consortium with IDAC, just to find out, okay, now that we have this policy, we've been doing this initiative for several years, where do you guys feel you stand? Are we giving you the training that you need? Are there areas that you need some help with? So we're sending this out rather than just kind of developing material from what we think is important. We're really trying to tailor it to the needs of our web administrators, because maybe they're good on web content. Maybe they really need that document remediation. And maybe we need to spend more time on, how do I change my document to a web page? So a lot of the times I'm just making assumptions based on what I'm seeing and the end results, but we really need more feedback from our users to find out, where are their challenges? What do they need? Do they even know that we have resources available to help them with this? So that's one that we have going out this next week to our web administrators to start that needs assessment process. So since I work on the web, my role is public facing web content. That's where we're starting. But I really like the idea of a risk assessment kind of for a more university standpoint. And we're still having those conversations to try to figure out where to move forward with that for us, for our university.
Nice. So next point 6 is having stakeholders at the same table. One of the ways I try to entice people to become stakeholders in accessibility is through the accessibility events that we try to offer, excuse me, that we try to offer at North Idaho College. You know, whether that's new student orientation and having a booth, which that seems like an odd place for, you know, to talk about IT accessibility, but hey, I meet a lot of actually volunteers that feed into the larger events, which are like our Pave the Way to Global Accessibility Awareness Day event, which is like a accessibility and assistive technology exhibit that we have every April ahead of GAD. And then our Accessibility Camp Coeur d'Alene in August, which is more of a symposium of professionals that are hopefully going to help some NIC staff and faculty to understand how to make their resources more accessible. And in case they don't make it, I make sure that that event is open up to other institutions so that at least somebody's going to glean a lot of good knowledge from these events. And so, yeah, those are the main accessibility events that we have at NIC. And I'll have let Carolyn talk about like the monthly committee, only because we haven't had one since the beginning of COVID, and she could probably speak better to that point.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We have an IT accessibility committee at Boise State, and that was one of the things that once COVID hit, it just became even more difficult to have those monthly meetings. We've recently started them back up again. And it includes major stakeholders from across campus. So we have representatives from faculty, from students, from staff, from the provost's office, from research. So all these different committees or different people make up the committee, and we can discuss some of these issues, specifically focusing on IT accessibility. So our information technology infrastructure, our websites, our digital documents, things like that. Eventually, we're hoping to make it more of an accessibility committee, but right now our focus is IT accessibility. And that's been really helpful because there are people at that table that know more about the processes and policies in their areas than I know about what's on the web. I can speak to the things that I find that are challenging on the web, but they can actually take it back to their different areas and work on these policies and kind of help with that buy-in across the university. And Jeremy, did we miss 0.5 mandatory and optional trainings?
Yes, I think
Okay.
my bad.
So I'll mention that really quickly.
Our
fifth point was, I know, right? Our fifth point was mandatory and optional trainings. And this kind of goes hand in hand with some of this. Identify ways that you can provide those professional development opportunities for people, whether they're mandatory or optional. And we like to have, we instituted kind of a mandatory, if you want access to a WordPress site to publish content at Boise State, we have basically like a policy. This is the bare minimum information that you need to have. So that's kind of our floor of everyone has the same awareness. And then we also provide a whole host of options for people to do optional professional development trainings. So they can schedule one-on-one time with us. We have developed a micro certification badge course that they can go through and demonstrate that they know how to publish accessible web content. And so we worked with the state of Idaho through SkillStack to create that badge. And it's really well received. So we've had, I think I currently have 90 people at the university enrolled in it, and probably about 30 have completed it because it is a pretty intense course. But there are also online resources that you can direct people to if you don't have the time or resources to develop like an in-house training course. There are so many amazing free resources out there, ranging from full online courses to just like templates and resources available. So think about how you can provide some of those optional trainings to help promote that professional development. And we went with a badge course because we really wanted to reward and recognize people for doing this work. So they will have a certification that they can attach to their resume to say, I know what it means to create accessible web content. So we have those two different levels when it comes to trainings. The option, we started with the optional and promoted that on campus, but then we got to the point where we're like, okay, we need a baseline that anyone who has this account needs to have this information. So now we have both of those things in place. And I think it is helping because I don't have as many surprised, like, oh, I didn't know that type responses when I email people. So I have noticed a big difference when we after we instituted that.
Very nice.
And then Jeremy, do you want to talk about our point 7, the champions on campus?
So some of this is one of the things. Actually, let me start with. I'll flip the points that we have in our notes here in talking about the recognizing people as champions on campus. Today being Global Accessibility Awareness Day, it's one of these big days for all of us, but it's one where I like to celebrate the people that have done well to move accessibility forward. And it's not necessarily somebody who's like, I've gone through and captioned all my videos for the year. It could be as simple as last year I gave an award to a student who understood why it was important to add audio description to the slideshow that we were going to feature during commencement. And when she understood that, man, she made it like she wanted to make that project the best of her ability so that it could be understood by everybody in the audience as much as possible. So it was just cool to see this whole paradigm shift with her. Not only that she was going to make sure audio description got done, but she got passionate about it as soon as she realized why it was important to do. And yeah, so I wanted to recognize her and kind of elevate her not only to the fellow students, but to the staff and faculty, saying, you know, honestly, if a student can get this, why can't you guys? And you know, I definitely wanted to prop people up who are doing well to support accessibility on campus. Just briefly, I'll mention that today I gave out well, the total of 4 awards. And to me, that's kind of a sign of progress, where if people are making a difference like that, that's awesome that I can recognize them for it. And I'm hoping not only that it solidifies the work that they're doing, that they get better with it, but then it also serves others as like, well, what do you mean by, what is this Accessibility Trailblazer Award? How do you get that? Well, you just start by you know, really focus on accessibility in an area that will have a big impact for students. And then the second bullet point I want to talk about in here is something that I wanted to model after the University of Washington and accessibility liaisons. So we have every campus probably has folks where they focus on one area of accessibility. They may not know the breadth of topics that we know as far as being, you know, in the roles that we're in, but they know a certain depth of it really, really well. So this might be somebody in e-learning who is just going crazy for PDF remediation and wants the best tools because she knows how important it is to make sure those documents are accessible to somebody using a screen reader. It might be somebody in our a media department that is making sure that all videos are captioned and audio have audio description. So to me, those are the accessibility liaisons, where they do focus on accessibility as a big part of their job, and get them together and find out exactly kind of you know, what issues they're running into, and also where they think we need to go in the current year to kind of provide a tactical approach for the direction that we're going with accessibility that year. And really, it's kind of nice to give you know, staff and faculty buy into this process as well, as opposed to just being somebody who's kind of being the accessibility cop on campus. I don't like that approach. I like people to feel like they're a part of the process with me. Did you have anything else to add on that one, Carolyn?
Yeah, no, I agree. That's really important, because when it's done well, accessibility is kind of hidden. Like, it just works. It's, you can read the information, you can access the information. You don't always know all the things that went on behind the scenes to make that content accessible. And so bringing that to the forefront and recognizing that when you see it is really important. We had in our School of Nursing, they had every single one of their policies was an inaccessible PDF. And what drove them to make the change to make those accessible web pages with an optional PDF download was they did not want to force any of their students to self-disclose that there was a disability that prevented them from reading the content. Not that they couldn't read the content, but that the content itself was inaccessible. So they took it upon themselves to make that change. Plus my reminding them that they had all these PDFs on the site that was inaccessible. Once she got the go ahead to make that change, I looked at that site and I'm like, that was a ton of work. That was amazing. But if you didn't know that going into it, it just looks like really great organized websites. But it took a lot of work and to get the buy-in to do that project. And so I nominated her for our Process Improvement Award because that was a much more sustainable process, not only being accessible, but she completely revamped and organized and made an accessible template. They're all consistent. She updated it. It's amazing. She did that process with accessibility at the forefront, but the work that she put into it doesn't really show through in the final product because it just works. And so recognizing that and calling it out is really important because it does take work. to do this, which is why it's so challenging. So yeah, just finding those champions and recognizing them is huge.
Awesome.
All right, do you want me to take the lead on this one?
Yeah, please.
So we are towards the end, we're at the end of our presentation, and we want to talk about work still to be done. So our image on this slide is the person sitting on the stand with the lifeguard watching over the lake. This is where we need to get into the monitoring mode. We may have built those systems, put those policies in place. We've kind of built that little life raft and those things that we need to, you know, make things a little bit more accessible for the future, but it's never done. The work is never done. We have to monitor and be vigilant and stay on top of it. And one of the things that Jeremy and I both talked about when we were talking about this presentation was the idea of finding workarounds versus built-in. So find ways that you can build accessibility into your processes from the beginning. Spending the time trying to figure out how to work around accessibility is just a waste of time because, you know, well, what if I just put it in this platform with a password and do this? And I'm like, but the content's still inaccessible. We still have the work to do. But if you spend the time to change your processes a little bit, to figure out how you can think about accessibility at the very beginning, and it just becomes a habit, then we don't have to spend all that mental energy trying to figure out how to work around the issue. So anytime you kind of, and I use this a lot even with myself, when I find myself fighting with the process, I need to take a step back and figure out what needs to change, because that's usually an accessibility red flag. If you're fighting with the way a process works, or if you're fighting with, you know, I'm still getting issues when I make this document, things like that, that's where you need to look at the process and see how do you need to build in accessibility a little earlier. And then you kind of clear up some of those red flags, and then it becomes a lot more easier and more streamlined for you. So always look for ways to build it in. If you're going back and trying to work around and trying to build that accessibility and, you know, after the fact, or trying to avoid it for some reason, it's always going to be harder, and then it's going to feel burdensome. But if you find ways to build it in, then it's just going to become a habit, and it's going to take much less mental effort. It's just going to be something that you do without even thinking about it. And your product's going to be better too. It's going to be accessible. People are going to be able to access it. You're not going to have a liability issue. It's just going to work. So that still needs to happen. We still encounter those conversations, maybe not quite as often, but we still have those conversations with people of, well, what if I just did this? And I'm like, but that's still not really answering the question. We need to build accessibility into the process rather than try to put it somewhere else and hope it's not found, if that makes sense.
Right. Next bullet point is more resource sharing across campuses. This is definitely a passion of mine, because I've had so many people be approachable when I need help trying to work on something, you know, whether it was policy in the past or on a specific kind of outcome. It's just great when I've had other people helping me. And so I'm always trying to help others as well. Somebody contacted me and said, hey, I feel bad about asking you this, but can you give me your files for this, that, and the other? And as long as it's not some kind of top secret thing with NIC, I don't know of anything, you know, I'm going to share how I did things, because you know, I just liken this to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu again. It's like the only way that I can get better in Jiu-Jitsu is if I make everybody around me better. It just makes sense. I just try to get in this continuous greedy learning process, and accessibility should really be no different, where we're always trying to learn from everybody we can. And it doesn't matter whether they're, you know, a 50-year veteran in this field or, you know, 3 years in. I usually find I can learn something from just listening to somebody else's process, just tweaking it a little bit to match what I need for what we're doing in the institution. So I'm a big fan of open sourcing a lot of my tools. Like I said, we've got this risk assessment. If anybody reached out to me and wanted it, I would gladly send that your way, just because it's helped me in the past and know it could help somebody else. Why wouldn't I share that? And along with that, on the other side of this is working smarter. Ego is not your amigo. If you got to reach out to ask another institution for help, good. That's, you're basically reaching out rather and hopefully trying to shave off hours of trying to figure something out yourself, if at all. Next bullet point we're talking about here is practice over perfection. Use a BJJ analogy of trying to make things 1% better. Whenever I'm in a bad place, I'm in an area I don't know at all. I'm going to see how I can make that 1% better, because if I make it 1% better, I'm probably going to see how to make it 2% better. And if I can make it 2%, I'll see how to make it 5%. So that's what I'm always searching for, is that 1% moment. How can I just make this slightly better so I can move on to the next milestone?
Yeah, and I do that same thing, because when people are starting accessibility for the first time, especially if maybe they've inherited a website that has 300 PDFs and there's videos without captions and there's all kinds of stuff, you go into panic mode a little bit, like, how am I going to get all this done? I'm like, just focus on one tiny thing at a time. So when you're talking, if you only have 10 minutes, here's some things you can do in 10 minutes once a week. Make it consistent. Do it. Make it a habit. So when I was in the web administrator position, I set a timer. I set 1 hour, and anytime my scan report came in from my website to say, here are the things that are going on, I would set a timer for 1 hour and spend 1 hour of my time, because that equated to how much of the percentage of my time should have been spent on the web. Once I got all the accessibility stuff up to date, I then started doing quality assurance. So misspellings, broken links, things like that. Or, oh, hey, maybe I can pay attention this week to how are people moving through our site. So I just started adding in things slowly. And so it became much more manageable, and it just became a part of my work week. So look for those opportunities to break the work down into smaller steps, to find ways to practice it. So just get really good about doing one thing till it becomes complete habit. You don't even think about it. Then add something else in. Get really good about writing descriptive link text, so that no matter where you're writing link text, it's an email, in a video description, on a web page, in a document, you're writing that link text really clear, and it's concise, and it's great. That is now a skill you have that you can apply anywhere. Now do the same thing with describing images. Get really comfortable describing images, and you just slowly start to build these skills into your skill set to where they just become a habit. So I really encourage people to do that. And that's how I started. I just figured out how to do one thing and then started to add in those other skills as I went along. So yeah, that practice over perfection. We'll never get it perfect, but we can practice it every single time we make something.
Absolutely. And our last bullet point here is just to talk about continued buy-in and cultural shifts. Actually, Carolyn, I'll let you handle this one, since you had a very good response the other day when we were rehearsing this.
Oh, now I got to remember what that was.
Oh, just in talking about like IDAC and just
so when it comes, accessibility work never ends, because technology changes. We learn more information, we learn more every day, and it's never going to stop. So getting involved in organizations like the Idaho Digital Accessibility Consortium just gives you additional perspectives to bring back to your institution to keep doing this work. So getting involved with grassroots organizations, with professional organizations, talking with people across campus, with other campuses, that's just going to help give you ideas to continue working on this culture shift, because a lot of this comes down to, like, a lot of the problems we have with documents is they're designed for print. Well, now we've got to shift this new digital mindset and use the tools that we have in a digital landscape to make them accessible, and then bring that back to our colleagues and learn more about it. So the work never stops. And just knowing that you're never going to get to an endpoint where you're 100% accessible and you never have to look at it again. So yeah, just keep that mindset and keep going, and yeah, ask questions
Excellent.
along the way.
Awesome. Well, we've reached the end of our presentation, and yeah, just if you have any other questions or want to reach out to us, we have our contact information up on the slide. Probably best to reach me via email at jeremy.seta@nic.edu. And Carolyn.
Oh yeah, and mine
Go
is
ahead.
Carolyn Quintero at boisestate.edu, but you can also find all of our resources at Boise State Web Guide. So that's where you can find contact information about things we're doing at Boise State. I write information about accessibility and publish it there. So it's a great resource for accessibility, but then you can also contact us that way.
Awesome.
Thank you both for your time today. I need to jump in and wrap up for our captioner, but thank you both so much. Happy Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and thank you for supporting the Idaho Digital Accessibility Consortium and sharing your knowledge and expertise with the rest of us. You guys are doing really great work out there, and we appreciate you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Lane.
Lane.
We appreciate you.
Likewise. Yeah.